Now we're going to get started. Today we're going to begin our discussion of Passover, Easter, Communion, Last Supper, all these related issues. There's too much material to squeeze into 1 week, so we have 2 weeks of material. So just to give you the lay of the land. Today we're looking at biblical material on the Paschal sacrifice and attendant rituals from the Hebrew Bible. That's today. Wednesday we'll be looking at the Jewish Seder, the celebration of Passover in post-biblical Judaism. Next week we'll be looking at the 2 main Christian adaptations of this. One is communion, the ritual of communion, or the Eucharist, and the other is the Christian Pascha, or also Easter. So there's a lot going on here. So we have the biblical legacy splitting off and doing lots of different things. So I'm going to try to keep things straight by focusing in each session on one particular part of that development. Okay, so today we're talking about biblical material on the festival of Passover or Pascha. One word I'm going to use a lot is the word matzah. I'll be using that word a lot today and on Wednesday. So what is matzah? Here I found on the web a nice picture of a matzah, right? This is a close-up view of matzah. Now I'm going to ask you in 1 second, what are all these little holes in the matzah? You see that little holes there? Right? Okay, so here's another matzah close-up. The size of these is around 8 by 10 inches about. I swear as I get older that each year the boxes of matzah get smaller in the usual way of American capitalism. So it's about the size of a loose-leaf sheet of paper originally. Now it's a little smaller. That's the square piece of matzah you buy in a box. So the square matzah is made by machine. So the machine has no leftovers anywhere. It's a square sheet. If you make it by hand, then the matzah turns out to be round. Okay, and it's also matzah made by hand is three-dimensional. It's kind of wavy and curvy, whereas machine matzah is completely flat and smooth. Okay, you bakers in the class, even this handmade matzah, you look closely, you'll see that line of marks caused by a little gizmo that goes through poking holes in the dough. Why do we poke holes in the matzah dough? Yes?
So to keep it from rising?
Keep it from rising, correct. The whole point of matzah is that it's not leavened, right? It is bread in the sense that it is flour and water, but it is not rise at all. We don't allow any bacteriological or yeast is a fungus, isn't it?
Microbe.
It's a microbe. There we go. Thank you. It's a microbe. Okay. Right. We don't allow the little beasties to ferment the dough. So it's very quick. You slap it together, flour and water, throw it into the oven. Right. Then also we run little pricks, gizmos in it. Same way you do make pizza dough. Right. Pizza dough. So it prevents it from rising. So to make sure it does not rise, and make sure the dough is completely baked through. That's why we puncture holes in it. Okay. That's matzah. That's matzah, okay? A circular matzah like this is about the diameter of a foot or so. It's that role of Pascha, and also matzah. So let's discuss the 2 words for a second. So we begin with the word Pesach, which is the Hebrew way of saying Passover. Pesach. What does that mean? Well, it's usually translated Passover, right? Hence the festival is known as Passover, right? So who passed over what? The angel of death passed over the houses, the angel of death passed over the houses of the Israelites. That's the verb that's used, to pasach. Right, as I note here, it's not clear it really means to pass over, skip or jump maybe to protect. Doesn't mean the angels passed over. Anyway, the philologists debate, but what do we care? There's notes in the JSB on the subject, and for millennia of Jews have called this Passover, so we're not going to change that now. So Pasach then means to skip over, jump over. The angel of death skips over, or the destroyer skips over the houses of the Israelites and does not destroy any of the Israelites. Okay, that's the word Pesach. It refers then to a sacrifice, which I'll discuss in a moment, and to a festival associated with the sacrifice. Let's do the word sacrifice now. What do I mean by sacrifice? What do I mean by sacrifice? Do I mean that your parents made a sacrifice to send you to Harvard? No, that's a metaphorical meaning. I'm here using it in its real meaning. What is the sacrifice? Trust me, I've got 2 kids in college. Trust me, they're making a sacrifice to send you to Harvard. Right? So what does it mean?
A lamb.
A lamb, right, a lamb or a goat, right? So which is slaughtered, and then the meat is processed in a ritual way and consumed in a ritual way. That's the sacrifice. Okay, we're also going to talk about matzah. I already showed you pictures of matzah. Matzah then is simply unleavened bread, a word of uncertain etymology, but it clearly means unleavened bread, bread that has not been allowed to rise. Okay, let's get to work then. We have the vocabulary, Pesach, referring to the sacrifice of a lamb or a goat, and the ritual processing of the meat and the blood and so on. And we have matzah, unleavened bread. Okay, let's go to work. The Torah sometimes conflates and distinguishes a 1-day Pesach festival from a 7-day matzah festival. This is already getting confusing. Right? In popular parlance, if you went to Hebrew school, right, you know that we talk about the festival of Passover. How many days is the festival of Passover? 7/8. Right. In the Torah, it's a 7-day festival. Right. Then later Rabbinic Judaism, for complicated reasons, it turns out to be an 8-day festival, which I won't pursue at the moment. So we have a 7-day festival, and it's loosely called the festival of Passover. If you read the Hebrew biblical text carefully, and no doubt you do, then you will notice sometimes some very disturbing phenomena that the texts don't always say what I just said. We have a 7-day Passover festival, a 7-day Pesach festival. Rather, we seem to have a much more complicated scenario going on, and evidence that lurking behind this was a very complicated and history. So, the main text is Exodus chapter 12. Where are we in the story? We've already had 9 of the 10 plagues. The Israelites are enslaved in Egypt by the wicked Pharaoh, right? Moses and Aaron, the Redeemer brothers, right, have brought 9 out of 10 plagues upon the Egyptians, but the wicked Pharaoh is obdurate. He is not going to release the Israelites. So God says, 1 more plague will I bring upon Pharaoh. 1 more, and that'll do it. And that is the plague of the death of the firstborn. Right, that all the firstborn Egyptians shall be slain in one evening in a miraculous display of divine might, and then Pharaoh will finally relent, allow the Israelites to leave. So it is that critical moment, just before that final fateful evening, which the firstborn are killed, that is the Passover. That's the setting for Exodus chapter 12, which lays out in great detail the rules and laws, rituals regarding the Paschal sacrifice. Paschal, that's the noun we use from Pesach, right? So Paschal, P-A-S-C-A-L or P-A-S-C-H-A-L. We really should have an H in it. Okay. Paschal. Okay. Exodus chapter 12. On the 14th day of the first month in the evening is Pesach, followed by a 7-day matzah festival. Let's keep this straight. Okay, I have to talk about the calendar for a second, a brief digression, then go back to Exodus 12. How does the Hebrew calendar work? Answer. This is another complicated. This is a swamp. Trust me on this one. You don't want to get stuck in this one. So I'll have to go very fast and tread very lightly over here. Okay, what does a month mean? Month. Why does a month, why does our month, January, February, etc., have 29, 30, 31 days? Because we take the solar year and divide it by 12. Our months have no connection with the original month. What does the word month come from? Moon. Does our month have any connection with the moon? 0. We have the period of time, which is more or less a lunar cycle. It's actually more than a lunar cycle. Right? But our month, the new moon could come on the first day of the month. The new moon could come on the 15th day of the month. It doesn't matter. It's completely random. In the Hebrew Bible, apparently, a month really was lunar. Or, sorry, at some point in the history of the Hebrew-Jewish calendar, the month really is lunar, i.e., the new moon is on the first day of the month, or the last day of the previous month. The 14th or the 15th is the full moon, And then the 29th day of the month, or 30th, is then the new moon. The problem is, if you have a month of 29 or 30 days of lunar month, then it adds up to 354, depends on what you multiply. It adds up to 354. A typical lunar year is 354 days. Right? For you math majors, you can sit down and see how it works out. 354 days. It's 6 times 30 plus 6 times 29 is 354. 354 days of the lunar year is 12 lunar months is too short to fit the solar year. Now that's okay if you don't worry about the fact that the months will go through the seasons. Each year you lose 11 days, so gradually each months will take turns rotating through the agricultural year. However, if you want your month to stay in sync with the season, then you've got to figure out a way to take the lunar month and connect it to the solar year, because the sun determines the seasons. What does it tell us in Exodus chapter 12, verse 1? This is going to be the first month. This is the Paschal sacrifice. The Paschal festival is a spring festival. So the ancient Israelites must have had some way to coordinate a lunar month, which seems to be the word they're using for a month. The word for month in Hebrew means new, the new moon. They have a way to coordinate the month with the solar year. I know how later Jews did it. I don't know how the people in the biblical times did it. We don't know. It's confusing. But later on, they have a way of intercalating, that's the word, intercalating extra days each year so that the 354-day lunar year gets supplemented with some extra days, an extra month. Turns out later on, 7 times out of every 19 years in a cycle, you add an extra month. So that the lunar year and the solar year can be kept in sync. Whether that's the calendar in use in the book of Exodus, I do not know, nor does anybody else. So we have 3 possibilities. A solar year, which is what we have. Solar year, we pay no attention to the moon. A lunar year, which would be simply each month is determined by the moon. 12 months go by, you have a year. You lose 11 days on the calendar, but hey, so what? Then we have a solely lunar calendar. Lunar by the month, solar by the year, so that these sync with each other. Okay? Is that too much information? Then more than you wanted to know about the calendar, right? Our assumption is, that's enough, Shia, no. Okay, so it seems then that Passover, the Paschal sacrifice, is to be on the first month, it calls it, the first month of the year, which is in the spring. Cultures divide whether the new year occurs in the spring or the fall. So here we have the first month is in the spring. This is a spring festival, and this to be brought on the 15th day of the 14th day of the first month is the Paschal sacrifice, followed by a 7-day matzah festival on the 15th to the 21st. Next piece of information you need to know. In the later Jewish calendar, and apparently also in the biblical calendar, the Israelite biblical calendar, the day begins the night before. All right, if you don't know what that means, you're completely befuddled. Right. What does it mean the day begins the night before? Right, that at dusk, in the evening, we go from one day to the next. We don't do this artificial thing of 12 midnight starts a day. No, the day begins at dusk. Not in the morning, at dusk. So, the 14th day of Nisan, the first month, 14th day of the first month, right? The sun is getting low on the horizon. The Israelites have slaughtered the Paschal lamb on the 14th day. As the sun sinks below the horizon, we now are on the 15th day of the first month, and that's when they eat the Paschal lamb on the 14th into the 15th, in the late afternoon into the evening, and they need to finish it before midnight. Why? Don't know. That's what it says. Okay, I'll stop here. Questions? This is a key thing. This chronology is going to come back next week to haunt us, so you got to pay attention. Okay, you understand the chronology. 14th day is slaughter of the Paschal lamb. 15th day, which begins the 14th at dusk. 15th begins the 7-day matzah festival. The 14th is the slaughter of the Paschal lamb. Got it? Questions? B, or you look unhappy or upset about something?
Well, do we have any idea why you ought not to eat the marrow?
No, I have no idea. There are all kinds of ritual prescriptions in Exodus 12. I don't have time to deal with them all. Perhaps in section you could sit down and actually read Exodus 12 slowly and carefully. It is, interesting, that's the word. It's interesting. All kinds of prescriptions there. Okay? No questions? Yes, Yoni.
I think David is more qualified to comment on this than me, but I think in the Islamic calendar, you sort of have a non-intercalated lunar calendar, which is why Ramadan falls at a different time.
That's correct. So yeah, the Islamic calendar is a good example of people who have a lunar calendar and don't care whether it's coordinated with the seasons. So if you don't care it's coordinated with the seasons, then each year you're going to lose because the lunar year of 12 lunar months is shorter than a solar year. So each year you're going to lose 11 days. The result is that the festivals will rotate their way through the agricultural year. Is that a problem? It's only a problem if your culture demands that they be in sync. If they're not agricultural festivals, then why not? Have Ramadan one year in the spring, and then it'll gradually work its way through the calendar through all the seasons. That's not a problem unless your culture demands it makes it so. Okay, David, did I say anything wrong in that, or we're cool? Okay, questions? Good. 5 minutes on to remind me. Okay, Exodus 12. Okay, that's the first. There we go. There I gave you a brief digression. So the 14th day of the first month, the 14th day is Pascha, Pesach, followed by 7-day Matzah festival. That's in Exodus 12. Then you got a bunch of other passages, and here's where the mind begins to boggle, right? Just trying to make sense out of all this. Exodus 23 is a festival calendar of 3 pilgrimage festivals, only mentioning a 7-day Matzah festival, and leaves out completely a 1-day Pesach festival, a 1-day Pesach festival. No specific date is given. Leviticus 23, 14th day of the first month is Pesach, 15th day is the 7-day Matzah festival. That's like Exodus 12. The real doozy is Deuteronomy 16. Deuteronomy 16 is a killer. Deuteronomy 16 says that altogether you have a 7-day festival. The first day is Pesach, followed by 6 days of a Matzah festival. According to Exodus 12, Leviticus 23, you have the 14th is your Pesach festival, followed by a 7-day Matzah festival. Deuteronomy seems to suggest that the two have been thoroughly conflated, and that it seems to be the 15th is the first day, which seems to be a Pesach, followed by a 6-day Matzah festival. So what happened to the 14th? What happens to the separation between Pesach and Matzah? In Deuteronomy, don't know what to do. But I do know this. One passage in Exodus it says explicitly, 7 days you shall eat matzah. And in Deuteronomy, the parallel passage says, 6 days you shall eat matzah. Is that a problem, class?
No.
Yes and no. Good. This is a review. It's a review question. Is that a problem? Yes and no. Yes. It sure looks like a problem to me. But of course the answer is no. Why?
Contradictions are only apparent.
Contradictions are only apparent. You have to know how to interpret it. So how did our rabbi solve this one? Look at the notes in the JSB. The rabbi said it's only an obligation to eat matzah on the first day. Arguing that 6 days you may eat matzah if you want to eat matzah. You could sit and eat carrots all day. There's no actual obligation to eat matzah as long as you don't eat leavened bread. The only day upon which there's an obligation to actually eat matzah is the first day. Now if you object, that's not what Deuteronomy says though. Shh! Don't be a nudnik. You know what a nudnik is? Someone who asks obnoxious questions like that. But that's not what the text says. Hey, I'm trying to get out of a jam. Give me a break. I got a tough problem. Anyway, so look at the notes. Look at the notes in the JSB. As I say in my bullet point, these variations show the inevitability of exegesis. Just as you shall not do any manner of work on the seventh day shows it must have had some way of explaining it. It's just too vague. It's too obscure. Here's a good example where it's not vague at all. It's too specific. I got a problem. I have a contradiction. I got to resolve it somehow. Okay. So, modern scholars argue that we have here a conflation of two originally separate festivals. This, for our purposes, doesn't really matter, but hey, let's just try to solve these problems quickly. Right? Modern scholars say these contradictions, these tensions, this parallel terminology, Pesach, Matzah, suggests we have two separate festivals that have been conflated. On the one hand, we have a Pesach festival. Pesach is a sacrifice, pastoral in origin. That's why you're slaughtering lambs and goats, because it has to do with the flocks. And it is apotropaic. A word I can use casually now in conversation. Yes, so what is apotropaic? Oh, good. Delighted. Right. Averting evil, turning away evil or destruction. Right? That's what's lurking behind the story of the Paschal sacrifice. Saves the Israelites from the destroyer. It is apotropaic. Turning off evil. Protecting flocks, protecting the firstborn, protecting the young, or something like that. We sacrifice the one to protect the others. Then there's a matzah festival, which seems to be agrarian. Fresh harvest, early spring harvest, fresh sprouts, that kind of stuff. Right? Why is it unleavened? I don't know exactly. Look at your anthropologist friends, they'll try to explain it to you. But it has to do with spring, harvest, beginning of the agricultural cycle, beginning of the agricultural year, etc., etc. The 7-day matzah festival. One agrarian, one pastoral, one apotropaic, one celebrating the natural cycle. And these festivals of their own mysterious origins were juxtaposed and then conflated. So the Paschal sacrifice, the Pesach sacrifice is home and family based, right? That's the whole point of Exodus chapter 12. Exodus chapter 12, each family, each clan is to slaughter a lamb and eat it. So a nuclear family of mom, dad, and 2 kids can't eat a whole lamb, right? So how are you going to consume a whole lamb in one sitting? Answer, you invite Uncle Morris and Aunt Sylvia, and the whole family over, and then you've got a big family feast. Right? So it's fundamentally a family feast. And it's done by tent. Right? Each tent, or each clan gets together and has its own lamb which was slaughtered and consumed on that evening. So it seems to be a home-based ritual. Right? Ritual by tent. Later on we would say by house or by household. As opposed to the Matzah festival, which seems early on to have been some kind of pilgrimage festival. What does pilgrimage mean? Not a trick question. Somebody tell me, what's pilgrimage? Good thing I asked. Yes, what's pilgrimage?
Traveling to a holy site.
Good, right. So it would be a travel to a holy site, not just a tourist. Right? You want to go see Notre Dame, the cathedral, right? You want to go see Oratoire Saint-Joseph in Montreal, right? It's not just a tourist, you're a pilgrim, right? You're there on a religious mission, usually to a religious site, and you think you're fulfilling some obligation. The famous example everybody knows, of course, the Muslims have an obligation to go on pilgrimage at least once in a lifetime to Mecca. Okay, so similarly we're told in the Torah that Israelites are to go on pilgrimage to the sacred center, and this is the language most characteristic of Deuteronomy. That you go on pilgrimage to the sacred site. Where would that sacred site be, class? This is not a trick question. The temple in Jerusalem. The temple in Jerusalem. Now Deuteronomy falls a fast one, because Deuteronomy is the same book with that mysterious 6 days you shall eat matzah. That's the same paragraph, has that very troubling line, right? Deuteronomy is also the one which combines Pesach matzah into one 7-day festival, and it is to be celebrated at the central shrine. In other words, in Deuteronomy, the Paschal sacrifice is not a household sacrifice in your tent with Uncle Joe and who I said before, Uncle Maury and Sylvia, right? All in the big tent. Rather, your family is to get up and go on pilgrimage to Jerusalem. Language in Deuteronomy is the place that God has chosen there His name to dwell, and there you are to celebrate the Pesach Matzah festival. So it's not to be celebrated in your house, it's to be celebrated in the central shrine. That's another innovation of Deuteronomy. But originally we think the Pesach was at your tent, Matzah was a pilgrimage festival, and then things gradually get combined. Last but not least, both of these get historicized being associated with Exodus from Egypt. Now, as we imagine that the original Pesach, if it's protecting flocks and herds from the destroyer, has nothing to do with the Exodus from Egypt, according to modern Bible scholars. Similarly, the matzah, if it's part of some agricultural cycle celebration, nothing to do with the Exodus from Egypt. But the Torah is already historicizing these events, these rituals, trying to take these rituals and put them into the context of the sacred history of the people of Israel. So, why do we eat matzah, class, according to Exodus 12? Why do we eat unleavened bread?
It's an agricultural celebration.
No. I just told you, that's what the modern Bible scholars say. So, of course, that's correct. That's not the answer I'm looking for at this moment. In Exodus chapter 12, why do we have unleavened bread? Why do we eat matzah?
You're fleeing from Egypt.
We're in a big hurry. We're in a hurry to leave, right? Any of you make bread in your bread machine? You know, typical cycle is 3 hours and 40 minutes, right? Well, a matzah cycle is 18 minutes. From beginning to end is 18 minutes to get into the oven, and then it comes out in 5 minutes, so you're done. If you're in a hurry, matzah is for you. So according to Exodus 12, it's historicizing it. I'll tell you why we eat unleavened bread, because our ancestors were in a terrible rush to get out of Egypt. They didn't have time for the 3-hour bread cycle. Similarly, why do we slaughter the Paschal lamb? According to Exodus 12?
You need that lamb to put on your doorpost.
Because we need the blood. The point of the Paschal lamb is to give us the blood. As anybody knows who reads the book of Leviticus, and we'll talk about this in a couple of weeks, right? The key stuff of sacrificial ritual in ancient Israel is the blood. Because the life is in the blood, as it says in Leviticus 17. So what you do with the blood is what distinguishes, even in Deuteronomy, is what distinguishes sacred slaughter from profane slaughter. Okay, I'm a little ahead of myself there. Okay, but it's the blood. What do we Israelites do with the blood in Egypt? Put it on the doorposts. Put it on the doorposts. Why do we put it on the doorposts? Because that is what keeps the destroyer at bay. Right? That's why the destroyer passes over the houses of the Israelites and directs his maleficent attention to the houses of the Egyptians. So here again, Exodus 12 is historicizing this ritual, historicizing the whole Paschal sacrifice, right? By putting it into part and parcel of the sacred story of the Israelites leaving Egypt. We modern scholars, respectfully, well, usually not respectfully at all, we modern scholars, right, suggest that this is a secondary interpretation of what had been earlier rituals, which the narrator of Exodus 12 was trying to bring into the sacred calendar of Israel. Feel free to accept that explanation. Feel free to reject it. I have no money invested in this explanation. Right? Feel free to say this is modern Bible scholars making all this stuff up, and you're not entirely wrong if that is your opinion. Right? However, I'm duty bound. Due diligence. I gotta say what people out there think. If you want to get a PhD, this is what you have to believe. Too bad Hillary is not here. She gets a PhD in Hebrew Bible. We would just test to make sure that this is right. That I didn't get it wrong. Okay. Questions on this? This is a big point. Okay. Understand the difference between what the text says and what we moderns think is the truth lurking behind the text. Okay, let's look briefly at that ritual in Exodus 12, then we go to the next big point. So what do you do according to Exodus 12? All right, what actually is the ritual? So we take a lamb or a goat. We set it aside on the 10th day of the month to prepare it for slaughter on the 14th day of the month. The 14th day of the month, remember that again, it's 14th day in the afternoon, 14th day of the month, we slaughter that lamb or goat. We usually use the phrase paschal lamb, so I'll just say lamb, but the text is explicit, it could be a goat also. It doesn't easily be a goat, but we'll say lamb. All right, so you take the lamb, you slaughter the lamb, the blood is taken and then processed in a specific way, daubed on the doorposts of your habitations. Right, the lamb is then roasted over fire. Some disagreement also between Deuteronomy and Exodus about how you cook it, but I can't do everything here. Okay, so you but read the notes in the JSB. Right, so you roast the Paschal lamb, right, and then in the evening, what do? You and Uncle Joe and Aunt Flo and everybody else, you get together and you have a big family feast and you consume the entire Paschal lamb. Again, you're in a hurry because you're about to leave Egypt, so the whole thing has to be finished before midnight. Before midnight, you may not eat any of it past midnight. Don't break any of the bones. Why? Don't know. Don't break any of the bones. Other series of instructions. And then you are to eat it in a state of readiness, ready to leave Egypt at a moment's notice. So, in other words, you have a meal. It's supper. Roast lamb, anyone? Shawarma, that's what it is. It's shawarma. If you don't know what shawarma is, walk down any street in the modern Middle East, and you'll see shawarma right into your left. It's the meat on a spit, you've seen it. Okay, back to where we are. Now, yes, question. Yes, sir.
Why is the lamb burned after, midnight, if there is none left over? Is there a reason for burning it?
There's definitely a reason. Definitely a reason. You can ask me now what that reason is, and then I'll tell you I don't know what it is. But I'm sure there's a reason. But in context, it would suggest because the Israelites are in a hurry to leave, so they can't dawdle. So you have an instruction, you got to be finished eating, put away all your utensils, get ready to go by midnight. What happens at midnight? The destroyer comes around. The destroyer comes around and kills the firstborn of the Egyptians. There's a mighty cry that rises in Egypt. There's a mighty yell as the firstborn everywhere, from the firstborn of Pharaoh in the palace to the firstborn in the jailhouse, right? They all drop dead, cut down by the destroyer. And then Pharaoh and the Egyptians come to the Israelites and say, leave, please, get out, leave, just leave us alone, go already. So you have to be ready. Then is not the time to start packing. That's the story in Exodus 12. Now, of these rituals which carry forward the history of Judaism, I'm assuming that Exodus 12 is giving us rituals that the author regards as normative, right? This is how we observe the Paschal lamb sacrifice, the Pesach, and we do it this way because this is how our ancestors in Egypt did it. However, at some point, not all these things carry forward the history of Judaism. The most striking one that does not carry forward is the blood manipulation. Later on, when the Israelites are settled in the land of Israel, and there's a temple in Jerusalem, and they are in fact, Pesach is turned into a 7-day plus the 14th pilgrimage festival. As far as we know, they slaughter the Paschal lamb, and they bring the blood and pour it at the base of the altar. And then it's roasted anywhere in Jerusalem. Anywhere you can find a spot. Remember, there are hundreds of thousands of pilgrims, so it must be pretty crowded. Anywhere you can find a spot, you set up shop, and you roast your lamb, and you get together with your family unit, and you eat it. And no blood is daubed on any post, doorpost, lintel, or house. So that blood ritual does not carry forward. Next big point for anticipation of Wednesday and our discussion of the emergence of the Seder. This is the only festival in the Torah accompanied by a commandment to respond to children's questions. Right? The Torah has lots and lots of commandments, lots of rituals, thou shalt, thou shalt not, to be sure, including a sacred festival calendar. Classic text is Leviticus 23, which I already alluded to earlier. But this, out of all the festivals on the sacred calendar, or the Sabbath, the weekly calendar, or the annual calendar, this is the only festival associated with an educational or educative pedagogical function. That as you observe this festival, your child will come to you and ask you something, and then the text says, and this is what you shall say. And the text, the Torah, does this more than once. The canonical number, of course, does it 4 times, but it actually does it more. Anyway, so this is interesting. The text is also telling us something, that only the festival of Pesach Matzah, if I can conflate the two, right, has this educational function. So here we see the text. Exodus 12, good example. When you enter the land the Lord will give you as He promised, observe this ceremony. Okay, that's fine. And when your children ask you, what does this ceremony mean to you? Your children don't ask you, what does the Sabbath mean to you? The children don't ask you, what does the Sukkah festival mean to you? But the children will ask you, what does this ceremony mean to you? This ceremony, presumably this Pesach Matzah complex. Your children ask you, what does this ceremony mean to you? Then tell them, it is the Passover sacrifice to the Lord. Pesachu, right. It is the Pesach of the Lord, who passed over, that's the pun, right, who passed over, Asher Pasach in Hebrew, the noun, and then followed by the verb form, who passed over the house of the Israelites in Egypt, spared our homes when He struck down the Egyptians. I'm not questioning, heaven forbid, the truth of the narrative. This is consistent with itself. Just that now this historical fact has now been turned into a ritualized question and a ritualized answer. And there's only Pesach-Matzah which has that feature. So here we see a bunch more examples. 13. For 7 days eat bread made without yeast, and on the 7th day hold a festival to the Lord. Okay, that's no problem there. Eat unleavened bread, blah, 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 blah. Verse 8. On that day tell your son, I do this because of what the Lord did for me when I came out of Egypt. So here we don't wait for the kid to ask the question, we simply instruct the kid. Again, this is the only festival that has this aspect. Okay, then we'll skip on Exodus, Exodus 10 is an interesting passage. This is God speaking to Moses. Go to Pharaoh, for I have hardened his heart and the hearts of his officials, and I may perform these miraculous signs of mine among them. Okay, all of us moderns don't like this. We always object. We always think Pharaoh's not getting a fair shake. How come God hardens Pharaoh's heart? It's not fair to Pharaoh. To which my quick response is, yeah, but he was a no-goodnik, so it's okay. That's the brief response. God hardens his heart because He wants his heart to be hardened. Okay, that's a complicated problem, which are not our issue to discuss here. Let's continue, verse 2. That you may tell your children, mention how I dealt hardly with the Egyptians and how I performed my signs of the Lord, that you may know that I am the Lord. Thus God is saying, in this text, I need an opportunity to display my power. Many people ask, why did God need 10 plagues? Couldn't God come up with, drop the atom bomb up front, and that would bring a whole end to the whole mess? Well, in 1941, we didn't have the atom bomb. Okay, but God has the atom bomb already lined up, so why does He have to wait with 10 plagues? Answer, because it will not have this educative function if it goes over too fast. It needs time to sink in. Pharaoh and the Egyptians need to be fully impressed with the power of the Lord, and no less so the Israelites themselves, who need a display of divine power. That's why you need a string of plagues. And that's why you save the big ones for the end. Okay, and then we have in Exodus 13, Deuteronomy 6. Okay, presumably is out of these passages in the Torah, which associate Pesach, the redemption from Egypt, Pesach-Matzah, associate that festival with this educative function, with this ritualized question followed by a ritualized reply. Presumably here is where we're going to find the origins of what will later on become a Seder. And that's what we'll be talking about on Wednesday. What is a Seder? Well, the word Seder in Hebrew literally means order or arrangement. So in other words, it's a script. Everything is laid out. It is just prescribed and described. So what is a Seder? So here's my definition of a Seder. I admit not very elegant, but I think it gets the job done. A Seder is a meal eaten and a ritual performed on the first night of Passover. When's the first night of Passover, class?
15th.
The 14th day into dusk into the 15th. Got it? I'm telling you, keep this straight for next week. You're going to need it. Right. The 14th day at dusk turns into the 15th. That's the first night of what we now call the 7-day Pesach Matzah Festival. So, that's the meal eaten and ritual performed on that night. Why am I so careful on the chronology? You'll see. It has to do with Jesus. You'll see. On the first night in the Gospel of John. That's next week. On the first night of Passover, consisting of symbolic food and real food. Right? You eat a big meal. Ritualized gestures and ritualized speech. What are ritualized gestures? This is the matzah. This is the bitter herbs. And various Jewish communities have all kinds of ritualized gestures as far as they're customary. And ritualized speech. Question and reply, but it's not so much a free-flowing. The Seder is it's scripted. It's scripted. Questions, answers, benedictions, praise, scriptural exegesis, narrative. And that whole kit and caboodle is what we mean by the Seder. The scripted meal, the scripturalized talking, the scripturalized speech, the scripturalized prayer, it's all scripted. And the book that we use is the book we call the Haggadah, which I'll come back to, of course, on Wednesday. Anyway, this is the big question, class, and with this I will conclude. Do you see a Seder, as defined here in this rather inelegant but rather full definition? Do you see a Seder in the Torah texts? Now, I've given you on the handout, on all those bullet points, I have given you all of the relevant Torah texts. I'm not hiding anything from you. You don't have to worry that I got one up my sleeve somewhere that I'll pull out and surprise you. No. I've done due diligence here. I've given you all the relevant Torah texts. When your child asks you, this is what you should say, instruct your child. When they ask you, what does this mean? This is what you say. Tell them how the mighty hand of the Lord took us out of Egypt, blah, blah. I'm giving you all the texts. Do you see a Seder in those texts?
No.
The answer has to be no. You do see something unusual, right? You do see this educational function of Passover, which is not associated with any other festival in the Torah, not even the Sabbath. So that's something. But I would argue that's the hook upon which the Seder will later on hang. Or that's the spark, if you want. Or that's the catalyst. Or I don't know whatever word you want. Right? That will explain where the Seder comes from. And not surprisingly, these verses, these paragraphs, loom large in the Haggadah text, in the scripted text. We play up and read aloud these verses which say, the father must teach his son, must reply to his son, and if your son asks you on such as, child. If your child asks you on such and such a day, this is what you should say in reply, and so on. We play up those texts in the Seder ritual itself, as if to say, this is how we are fulfilling the mandate of Scripture. But Scripture itself does not have this whole rigmarole, this whole series of scripted, ritualized acts surrounding the Paschal eating of the Paschal lamb. And ultimately that's what turns the eating of the Paschal lamb from a meal into a Seder. It is all this scripted stuff. So, repeat, do we see that scripted stuff in Scripture? No. We will see it, however, on Wednesday when we look at the Rabbinic Seder and the Rabbinic Haggadah text.